How can silence, the absence of words, become the highest form of teaching? In the modern world, knowledge is almost always equated with speech, expression, and data. We associate learning with the transmission of information, the exchange of ideas, and the flow of language. Silence, by contrast, appears as absence, the space between sentences, the void left when communication stops. To be silent seems to imply ignorance or retreat. Yet the 13th century Sufi poet Yunus Emre proposed the opposite. For him, silence was not the lack of knowledge, but its fulfillment. It represented the state in which thought and language fall away, revealing awareness itself. Silence, in Emre's view, is not empty. It is full of presence, clarity, and direct understanding. This reflection explores how silence, rather than speech, becomes a mode of knowing. It follows Emre's insight that truth does not need to be spoken to be known. The guiding question is simple. What kind of silence teaches, and what does it teach us about the structure of consciousness itself? The modern human being lives in constant mental noise. Notifications, news feeds, endless commentary, not only from others, but from within one's own mind. Psychology now refers to this state as attentional fragmentation, the mind's inability to sustain focus amid competing stimuli. The result is information fatigue, a condition in which knowledge accumulates faster than the capacity to integrate it. Neuroscience adds precision to this diagnosis. Overactivity in the default mode network, the set of brain regions active during self-referential thought, correlates with anxiety, depression, and rumination. In simple terms, the mind that cannot stop talking to itself becomes trapped. Inside its own commentary, silence threatens this internal system of control. When external and internal noise stop, one confronts the bare presence of the self, unbuffered, unedited, unmasked. This is why silence feels uncomfortable to most people. It removes distraction and exposes consciousness to itself. We live in a civilization that confuses verbal fluency with understanding. We assume that what can be said is what is real. Yet our age of communication has not produced an age of wisdom. The question that follows is unavoidable. Can truth be known without language, and can silence restore cognitive clarity? To explore this, we turn to Yunus Emre, a 13th century Sufi poet from Anatolia whose teachings united theology, psychology, and experiential knowledge. Emre wrote in plain Turkish, avoiding the ornate Arabic and Persian of his era. His purpose was not to impress but to awaken. For Emre, silence was the most advanced form of language, a direct transmission of being. He used the term samt, meaning spiritual quietude, to describe a state of mind that perceives without judging. In this silence, the noise of self-ambition, fear, memory, and self-narration is cleared from the mirror of awareness. From a rational standpoint, Emre's method can be seen as epistemological. Silence is not passivity, but a form of inquiry, a mode of knowing that removes distortion. It is cognitive purification, the clearing of the perceptual field so truth can appear without interference. Emre's first lesson is that silence reorganizes attention, the foundation of all cognition. Speech arises from separation, he implies, but silence arises from unity. In psychological terms, attention acts as the mind's lens. When it is fragmented, perception becomes distorted. Emotional regulation suffers. Thought becomes noisy. Modern neuroscience confirms this. During periods of silence or deep stillness, The brain's alpha and theta oscillations synchronize, producing states of coherence associated with insight and creativity. Research on meditation and focused breathing shows that such synchronization reduces prediction noise, the brain's constant attempt to interpret incoming data, allowing more accurate emotional and sensory processing. Emre's teaching anticipates this. When attention is purified of distraction, perception no longer reflects personal narrative but reality itself. Silence, then, is not the absence of thought but its refinement. It aligns the mind with what is. In this framework, silence functions as a laboratory of perception. It allows cognition to recalibrate, much as scientists eliminate noise to detect a signal. The implication is profound. Truth becomes visible only when inner commentary ceases. Emre's second insight is that truth is not primarily verbal. It is intuited. He writes, "The tongue is silent, but the heart speaks." There exists a form of cognition independent of language, what psychology calls interoceptive awareness. The brain's ability to sense internal states before they are described. This mode of knowing is direct and preconceived. It is the intelligence of feeling rather than labeling, in Sufi terminology. This corresponds to Dika Kalbi, remembrance of the heart. It is awareness without words, a silent recognition of the real. Neuroscience. It parallels the function of the right hemisphere and the limbic system, which process relational meaning and holistic patterns before linguistic centers translate them into speech. Silence grants this deeper system room to operate. By suspending analysis, the mind allows integrative intelligence, empathy, intuition, and coherence to surface. Knowing in this sense is not a statement but an immediate recognition. Like seeing rather than describing sight, Emre's silence then is the medium through which the heart's cognition can emerge. It reveals knowledge that was never absent, only obscured by speech. The third aspect of Emre's teaching redefines silence as an instrument of self-observation. Silence is not escape from the world. It is a precise psychological tool. When speech subsides, metacognition, the awareness of one's own thought, becomes possible. In silence, the mind turns inward and observes the process of thinking rather than its content. This is the essence of meta-awareness in contemporary neuroscience and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. Emre's insight anticipates this by centuries. Speech projects the self outward. It extends identity into the world of argument and defense. Silence reverses that vector. It gathers attention back to its source. When the inner observer awakens, illusions of self-image begin to dissolve. In rational terms, silence is like a scientific control condition. By removing variables, noise, narrative, reaction, it reveals the baseline signal of awareness itself. The self seen in silence is not the personality but the witness. And so, Emre might ask, if you cannot observe your own thought in silence, how can you claim to know truth through thought? Perhaps Emre's boldest idea is that silence itself can communicate. In his view, a silent teacher may convey more than speech ever could. In Sufi epistemology, meaning is transmitted through hal, the inner state of being, rather than words. When consciousness is stable, it radiates coherence, and that coherence is felt by others. This notion, far from mystical, finds support in psychology. Research on emotional contagion and right hemispheric empathy demonstrates that humans exchange states of mind through subtle, non-verbal cues. Communication science further confirms that tone, rhythm, and pause often carry more meaning than words themselves. Silence, when authentic, communicates trust, presence, and understanding. Emre encapsulates this succinctly. The silent one teaches with presence. In modern terms, consciousness itself becomes a medium of transmission. The teacher's silence stabilizes the listener's attention, synchronizing mental states much like resonance between tuned frequencies. Thus, silence is pedagogical. It teaches not through information, but through transformation. The question remains, could the most powerful instruction occur without instruction at all, through the quiet coherence of being itself? Yet one might object, if truth cannot be spoken, why did Emre speak at all? This is the central paradox of mystical language. Words are necessary to lead the mind toward their own transcendence. They are ladders that exist to be climbed and then discarded. Emre's poetry and speech function as conceptual catalysts, tools that provoke realization, not substitutes for it. Modern epistemology parallels this insight. Cognitive science reminds us that mental models are representations, not reality. The map is not the territory. Language structures experience but cannot contain it. Emre's strategy, then, is to use words to guide toward silence, to direct attention back to the field from which both speech and meaning arise. In psychological terms, linguistic processing acts as a scaffold for direct awareness. Once stability is reached, the scaffold is no longer needed. Thus, the endpoint of all explanation is the dissolution of the need to explain. Truth begins where words end. How, then, can Emre's teaching translate into modern practice? The first step is observation without commentary, brief moments of complete mental quiet. This is not suppression, but suspension, allowing thought to settle without interference. Neuroscientific studies show that such periods lower activity in the amygdala, reducing emotional reactivity. The second step is attentional grounding, direct awareness toward sensory data, the feeling of breath, ambient sound, or bodily presence, without labeling them. This practice reduces cortical chatter and increases perceptual clarity. Third, emotional regulation through quiet recognition. When one meets emotion in silence rather than argument, integration occurs. Prefrontal regions responsible for reflection and empathy become more active, while stress circuits quiet. Fourth, reflective response. Speech should arise only after meaning has settled. Studies in communication psychology show that intentional pauses increase comprehension and trust in conversation. These steps describe what might be called functional silence. Deliberate non-speech as cognitive hygiene. Periods of quiet allow the mind to reset, reorganize, and reconnect with discernment. In social contexts, silence functions similarly. In dialogue, the absence of immediate reaction increases resonance. It lets meaning ripen. Thus, silence becomes not retreat, but intelligence, in action, a form of moral and cognitive balance. For Yunus Emre, silence was not withdrawal from life, but re-entry into it, a return to reality unobstructed by noise. Silence cleanses. Attention awakens the heart's deeper intelligence, reveals self-knowledge, and allows truth to communicate itself without distortion. Modern science converges with this ancient insight. The quiet mind perceives more accurately, feels more compassionately, and decides more wisely. In Emre's framework, silence is both an epistemology and an ethics. It refines perception, how we know and purifies expression, how we act. The highest wisdom is not found in argument or analysis, but in the stillness from which both arise. Perhaps then, truth never needed to be spoken at all. It only needed to be heard in the silence that has always existed beneath every word.